actually what needs to happen is a coming together of these two perspectives. So
Uh-huh.
at first, most of the time, we have to really move away from the idea of right and wrong to really recognize the empty looking and then the fullness, the everything. So the nothingness and the everythingness, or we could call it big consciousness, and the big I am, which is beingness. And there has to be really a moving away from like everything that you think and feel to really recognize that, like a clean slate. So you're not going in and getting caught up in the mind and the seekingness of the mind. And then once that's been fully stabilized, it doesn't always happen like this. Life is messy. Sometimes it's like it happens bit by bit, and sometimes it's like a gradual. But I'll just speak like this way today. So sometimes when that's been fully established, where there's been a real shift and this recognition that's stable of this beingness and this empty looking, and that often comes from totally losing all contact to the personal world. So you have these periods of just being in pure beingness, just pure aliveness without the person there at all, and it is incredibly blissful, and it's really beautiful. But then there has to be this middle way where there is an ability to function, because if you're in that, like totally in the absolute, you cannot really function. You don't know that it's bad to walk in front of a car. You know, you that cognitive part of your mind isn't working often when you have these experiences. So there needs to be a coming back together. And sometimes in the coming back together, the functioning world never functions as well as it did before. So the functioning body-mind mechanism doesn't do things as well as it did before, because you're not activating this heavy thinking process all the time. So because you're not activating that area of the brain, I assume it is, then you're maybe not as a high functioner as other people. But that's okay. That's just part of the payoff. But there does need to be a coming back. And this is where the integration is endless, this part. And this part is the integration of love and light into the body-mind mechanism. And I don't know the extent and the depth of that goes to, because I feel like it's an endless process of this integration into that. And so what might be happening to you, and this is what I suppose happens for a lot of people, is these two things are happening at the same time, and it makes your mind feel dizzy. So rather than having this clear case where you like absolutely removed into the absolute and then you come back into the personal world, it's kind of happening bit by bit. And then when you go to the personal world, you feel really confused as to what's right or wrong. And then you go back to the absolute and you're like, who cares? So for you, it's like there has to be some peace with that by a recognition of what's happening and this ability to hold grayness, you know, to be able to, you know, not get freaked out by the right or wrong thing and not make any absolutes, to recognize that in the human world we do have apparent rights and wrongs, but also in this process we also have to completely detach from that. But then it comes back to the middle, and if you're going dramatically from one to the other, it can make you feel like schizophrenic or like mad, because at one moment you deeply care about something and then the next moment you don't care at all and you're in bliss. And then you're like, well, which one do I hold? And you've got to recognize that that one that's saying which one do I hold and where do I go is illusion in the end. And your job is to just keep remaining with the I am and let this like backwards and forwards work its way out, which can feel crazy, but not get deluded by that craziness of it, if you know what I mean. Like I remember feeling like I was so unstable for quite a few years, where I would suddenly just see all evil and violence, like my darkest, deepest nastiness would come out, and my partner was evil and the world was evil. And then I would be thrown back into being in complete love, and I couldn't even reconcile the two. I was like, And what often happened is that I then felt guilty for seeing the evilness or the darkness, and I didn't realize it was this process of extremes that just would eventually come together. You know, and all I had to do, which sometimes I did, was remain still. And what I mean by still is like, sort of, I mean by coming back to presence, sort of. I mean, that is so hard to talk about because we then question who is doing that, but you keep discerning, this isn't true, that isn't true, and here I remain. So the story of the Buddha, if you really think of the story of the Buddha, or really reflect on it, he sat under the Bodhi tree for 40 days and 40 nights, and Maya presented heaven and hell. So you could say heaven is like the falling in love, you know, like the going to oneness, and then hell you could say is like the deep seeking and the seeing of good and bad and right and wrong in the world. And for 40 days and 40 nights, Buddha remained still. And it doesn't really mean that the Buddha remained still. It was that stillness was deeply recognized in this oscillation. And then eventually they sort of came together, and in coming together they sort of dissolved in some way. Like that issue with these two opposites disappeared. Then you've got the next process of integrating it more and more into the personality, and the personality just comes more and more loving, you know, like through time, or aligned with love. No, that's not a good idea. But I don't know if this touches anything, but what will begin to happen is it might be that this new stage happens where energetically the others all become you as well. So that also loses its boundary, that others think or feel a certain way. Begin to mean that they're like that also is another apparent process, is that they'll begin to fade. That's more like the integration stuff, you know, where you become more and more made of light, where where you'll stop touching in any way their apparent will. Oh, it sounds also weird. Will, their ideas, all of that will become as invisible as your character became. It will become, and that's a bit. That tends to be a bit more of this expansiveness, where the character comes more and more in love. So it tends to be more after that stabilization, that shift happens, where, but sometimes it all gets muddled up, so it's not one thing or the other, and it just their agendas, their will begin to disappear more and more, and then the others all become more and more silent. But that's more of an integration part, where not just the others but the whole world, like it just like filters out into everything. Yeah. So that, just be open to play with that, you know, to play with the others and what the others think. And at times, you know, when it's safe to really allow life to move that character without the consideration of others. I'm not recommending that to anyone that's low on empathy. You've got to do other work if you're low on empathy, but I'm pretty sure that you're not low on empathy. So, you know, that you're not going to be destructive or power hungry, you know. Like, and then really trusting like life to navigate all of that, and so they can really, the others can really disappear. So it's all like one movement. If you get a sense of what I'm saying.